Hello, welcome to the EPG Pathshala program in linguistics. This is Pramod Pandey, Center for Linguistics, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Today we will be discussing prosodic features, juncture and stress. The main objectives of this module are to make you familiar with the prosodic features as they were introduced by structural phonologists. In the American structuralist tradition, the notion of the phoneme was the most important notion. However, the prosodic phenomena such as juncture, stress, tone, and intonation were also included as phonemes. How this is so, we will get to know in a little while. The phonemic principle is stated as follows, as you see on the screen. All languages have a limited number of speech sounds that contrast with each other and that differentiate words from each other. These contrastive units are phonemes. Prosodic features were also assumed thus to be phonemic on the grounds that they could be extracted from speech as independent units. Prosodic phenomena were also treated as phonemic because they could be extracted from speech as independent individual units. However, the prosodic phenomena differ from the segmental phenomena in their phonemic status. Number one, not all prosodic features are phonemic. And number two, that although segmental phenomena can be explained on their own, prosodic features such as stress and tone cannot be accounted for on their own. They can be accounted for in relation to the adjacent units. For example, a stressed syllable is one which has greater prominence than an adjacent syllable. Similarly, a tone is high or low depending on the neighboring syllable, which may have high or low tone. The relation between the various levels of tone, high and low, is thus a relative matter. Moreover, it differs from speaker to speaker. So, within the range of a speaker, you have to find out whether a certain tone qualifies to be a tone on the basis of its relation with an adjacent tone. The term juncture. Juncture is an interesting term. In the structuralist phonology, it was given considerable importance. However, it has come to be treated elaborately but without mention to the term juncture in today's phonology. Since the basis was American structuralist discussion of juncture, let us try to see how the notion started. What is juncture? Juncture is the various process phenomena that are found to occur at the transition from one segment to another segment. Let's take two words, for example, which are often cited as examples of juncture. One is nitrate and the other is nitrate. The consonants and vowels in these two words are the same: n, I, t, r, a, t. Although the consonants and vowels and their arrangement is the same in these two words, but there is a difference in the transition from t to r in the middle of the word. Whereas in nitrate, there is a slight pause that you notice. In nitrate, there is no such pause. Whenever there is a pause or a break in the transition, we call this open juncture. And when there is no such pause, it's absent, there is a continuity, we call it closed juncture. The open juncture is also known as plus juncture. There are various other expressions that come to our mind when we think of juncture, and these are a matter of considerable interest and entertainment among linguists. For example, in English we have examples such as I scream with open juncture versus ice cream with close juncture. Can you think of examples such as these in your own languages? I can think of some in Hindi. One of them, for example, is, which I have just thought of, are these words, something like lekha in Hindi, which means writing, lekha, and lekha is two words actually, that is take and eat. So although again the consonant vowel sequences are the same, but there is a difference between the two sequences in terms of the presence or absence of juncture. In lekha, there is absence of there is close juncture, and in lekha there is open juncture. The discussion of juncture here in this module is sufficient for our purposes here, as it introduces the notion. Later on, in the following course on advanced phonology, we will see how the various phenomena that occur at the transition from one sound to another, in fact, are quite complicated and quite rich. The study of these phenomena gives us an insight into the organization of segments and higher level units within a sentence. That the discussion of many of these processes will have to wait for us when we introduce the theory of phonology, which talks about various levels of units. So far, we have looked at only two of them. One is segments and the other is syllables. So we'll now turn to discuss stress and accent. Stress is a term which is of considerable importance, especially in a language such as English, where it works as an organizing principle in phonology. What is stress? Stress is generally defined as relative prominence. It has two manifestations mainly, one word stress and the other sentence stress. In word stress, a certain syllable has greater prominence than another syllable. The prominence is manifested in terms of various phonetic cues such as duration, amplitude, change of pitch, and the quality of the vowel. We take a look at all of these soon. Now, sentence stress is actually stress on words when these words occur in a sentence. The stress on words in a sentence is dependent on various factors, such as the syntactic structure, grammatical form, the special meaning that the speaker wants to convey, all of these. We will discuss them in greater detail in the modules for 27 and 28. Let's turn to look at the phonetic qualities of stress. So, the main phonetic cues of stress are, as you see on the screen, duration, amplitude, vowel quality, pitch change, and also extra breath force. Duration is length. So when a vowel is longer than another vowel, when it gets stressed, this may happen, but this doesn't have to necessarily happen. Sounds which are stressed, syllables which are stressed, may have greater amplitude, maybe more sort of intense, maybe more loud than a syllable which is not stressed. A syllable which is stressed can have a change of pitch. I will try and demonstrate how this is so. In a language such as Hindi, if you have a stressed vowel beside an unstressed vowel, then we find that the stressed vowel is longer, such as we have a word such as salana. In the word salana, the la syllable is stressed, and we find that it is longer in duration than the first syllable, such as sa, salana. Also, if we pay close attention, it is la which is also has greater amplitude, which is heard louder than the sa or the na. Not only this, when I say salana, suddenly you notice that there is a change of pitch. Now, in order to be able to see all these, we need spectrographic evidence. We will have them soon. But how does it happen when the pitch changes? Phoneticians say that there is a change from a low to high in the realization of stress in Hindi. In different languages, there may be different ways in which the pitch changes. It need not necessarily be of one kind. It can be high to low change. In a word, in English, for example, when you say property, you have said something like which is from high to low, there's a falling tone. When you say something like attack, you may have you may have a low to high tone. In the same language, you can have different ways in which the pitch changes. Then, in some languages, English is a very good example, a stressed syllable may be pronounced with extra breath force. For example, when we have a word such as paper, the first syllable pay is stressed, and it is clearly heard to be pronounced with more breath than per, paper. Now, this may not happen in all languages. So what do we do? How do we finally decide on what the phonetic cues of stress are? It's very difficult to do so. All we know is that there are these many cues of phonetic stress, such as duration, amplitude, vowel quality, change of pitch, extra breath force. But how exactly they combine is not known, because there is a certain freedom we observe in languages in which only one or more than one of these may combine to give us the impression of stress. So native speakers perceive stress more or less in the same way, because they can associate stress with these phonetic cues. Degrees of stress. It is not simply the case that a syllable is stressed or unstressed, but actually you can have various degrees of stress. At the sentence level, it's much easier to note the various degrees. However, at the word level too, at least 3 degrees of stress are recognized. What are those? Say, primary stress, and then there is a secondary stress, and then there is no stress. That's the 3rd degree. So a word has 2 degrees of stress. One may be greater than the other, but both are stressed. In that case, we talk of primary stress and secondary stress. And then the syllables which have no stress at the 3rd degree, called no stress. Let's take a look at some of these words, how they are pronounced. Develop, pathology. In both these words, there is only one stress. But in the words pathological, devastation, we have 2 stresses. In pathological, law is the one which has primary stress, and pa has secondary stress. Devastation is the same. Te has primary stress, and de has secondary stress. Notice the way in which the diacritics are used for primary and secondary stresses. For primary stress, we have a superscript, and for secondary stress, a subscript. Apart from these two degrees of stress, there is also a third degree about which the structuralists talked. That was they called tertiary stress. It's not a very commonly found degree of stress, but there are certain words whose pronunciations need to have something like a third degree stress notion to explain them. For example, we have two words, forestation and attestation. In forestation, what we notice is that the vowel in the second syllable is a reduced vowel a. In attestation, in the speech of the native speakers, the vowel is a. It is not a reduced vowel. Now, phonologists explain the difference between the two as having to do with some degree of stress on te in attestation and no degree of stress on a in forestation. As we said, there are not too many examples to establish a tertiary degree of stress within words. Now we come to a very important topic in the discussion of stress, namely the factors that influence stress in words. There are many factors which can influence stress in words in different languages, or all of them maybe in just one language. English is an example of a language that has all these factors playing a role in determining stress patterns in words. The first factor that we take into account is the position of the syllable. Now, here we find that languages may differ with regard to there being a certain fixed position within the word which is stressed. For example, in Tamil, we have every beginning syllable in the word which is stressed. And then there is this Tibeto-Burman language, Adi, spoken in Arunachal Pradesh, where the opposite is the case. That is, there is a word final stress. So Tamil and Adi are cases of two opposite patterns. So the position here is that in Tamil, the first syllable within the word is stressed, and in Adi, the last syllable or the final syllable in the word which is stressed. There is a third type of language, namely Spanish, in which stress is placed on the second syllable from the right, that is, the penultimate syllable. We thus have three different types of languages which favor a certain position within the word. Tamil, first syllable; Adi, the final syllable; and Spanish, the second syllable from the right. Now, these are cases of standard varieties of these. You may come across certain dialects and varieties, for example in Spanish, where it is not necessarily always the penultimate syllable which is stressed, but we are told that the standard varieties have these patterns. Let's take a look at the examples from these languages. We now have a way to find out the pronunciation of these words. We can turn to these languages on Google and ask for the pronunciation of these words. I have checked all these pronunciations. For example, in Spanish, can be heard on Google. Based on the role that the syllable weight plays in determining stress patterns, we have two types of languages. We looked at Spanish, Adi, and Tamil. In these languages, stress is placed on a certain syllable irrespective of the weight of the syllable. It doesn't matter whether a certain syllable is light or heavy. All that matters is that the first or the last or the penultimate syllable will be stressed. These languages are called weight insensitive languages or quantity insensitive languages. The quantity of the syllable does not play any role in placing stress in them. As opposed to these languages, we have quantity sensitive languages. In quantity sensitive languages, a syllable is stressed provided it meets with a certain restriction on which syllable is stressed. As it turns out, it's mostly the heavy syllable which is stressed in the quantity sensitive languages. We have examples of some of these on the screen. So the examples from English show the first word to have only light syllables and the second word to have only the heavy syllables. English, Bangla, Malayalam. Both are quantity sensitive languages, and in both languages we have light and heavy syllable distinction. Now, stress on heavy syllables. What exactly is a heavy syllable? You will have gathered from the examples you have just seen is different from different languages. Let's take a look at some examples from quantity sensitive languages which have different notions of a heavy syllable. Notice Hindi, Bangla and Malayalam. In all these languages, the light syllable is controversially the same. That is a vowel followed by one or more consonants. The heavy syllable, however, seems to be different in these languages. In Hindi, as in English, a long vowel and a short vowel followed by a consonant, both of these characterize a heavy syllable. In Bangla, however, a heavy syllable is only a vowel followed by a consonant. There is no distinction between long and short vowels in Bangla. And in Malayalam, the opposite of Bangla is the case. Only a long vowel is considered to be a heavy syllable. The reason for this is that Malayalam doesn't have a consonant following a vowel in the same syllable. We thus have three different types of languages in which we have three different characterizations of a heavy syllable. There is another notion that actually predates the discussion of stress in structural phonology, but which we introduced at this stage for the sake of clarity. Notice that in a language such as Hindi, which has a long vowel as heavy, in the word Banjara that you notice, the final vowel is also a heavy syllable and yet it is not stressed. What is the explanation? The explanation that has come to be proposed in more recent times is through the notion of extrametricality. This is purely a notion that has come to be proposed in recent times. All that extrametricality says for our purposes here is that a certain unit such as a segment or a syllable may not be counted if it occurs either at the end of a word or at the beginning of a word. In Hindi, it is always a mora which is not counted for laying stress in a word. Now we turn to the third important factor that plays a role in the placement of stress in languages. Apart from the two degrees of stress, there is also a third degree of stress that has been found in a language such as Hindi and even Punjabi. There is a difference in these two languages between a syllable with just a long vowel and a syllable with a long vowel followed by a consonant. For example, in a word such as Sita, both the syllables are heavy syllables. The first one is stressed, C is stressed. In the word sitar, even words such as bimar, it is the final syllable which is stressed, tar and mar. Now the difference has to be explained in terms of some difference in the degree of the weights of the final syllables. If it is a simple heavy syllable like ta, in the final position, there is no stress on it in Hindi. But if it is a tar or a mar, as in sitar or bimar, then there is stress. Phonologists thus have proposed 3 degrees of stress. That is a light, a heavy, and an extra heavy syllable. Ashok Kelkar's proposal, Professor Ashok Kelkar's proposals to have an extra heavy syllable or a super heavy syllable has come to be accepted in phonological theory, although there are not many languages which have an extra heavy syllable playing a role in them. Now we come to the third important factor that plays a role in determining the stress patterns in languages. The third factor is the role of grammar in stress assignment. Look at the words on the screen. The noun increase, the verb increase, noun protest, verb protest. Now these are called doublets, that is, the same written word occurring as instances of different grammatical categories, noun or verb or adjective and verb, etc. What we notice is that in English, the stress pattern differs on account of which grammatical category the word belongs. In these cases of doublets, in both the words here, it is the first syllable which is stressed if the word is noun as an increase, and the second syllable is stressed if the word is a verb such as increase or protest. English thus is a grammar sensitive language. Now when we compare English to Indian English, what do we notice? Do we pronounce the words in the same way? Increase and increase, protest and protest? In most cases, no. In most varieties of Indian English, we find that this grammar sensitive difference between these two forms of a doublet is not maintained. So the difference is not grammar sensitive. Both the forms are pronounced in the same way. Increase, increase, protest, protest, or whatever way you choose. Because in most Indic languages, there is no phonemic stress, one, and secondly, the grammar plays no role in the placement of stress, by and large, until we find some evidence for there to be an importance of grammar in the placement of stress. We have looked at the various factors that influence stress placement in words in different languages. We will now turn to a classification of stress systems in world languages. There are mainly 2 different types, apart from those which take into account different important factors in determining stress. One is derivational stress, and the other is lexicalized stress. So stress can be of 2 different types. What do we mean by these terms, derivational and lexicalized, or idiosyncratic? What we mean is that stress may be determined or predicted entirely by a rule. There is a certain generalization. For example, in a language such as Tamil, the first syllable is stressed. In Adi, the final syllable is stressed. There is a very simple rule or constraint or generalization that determines stress in them. There is nothing special about a certain word that determines stress in it. Whereas there may be stresses in certain words which are lexicalized or idiosyncratic. For example, in English, we have the two words differ, D-I-F-F-E-R, and defer, D-E-F-E-R, with two different meanings. Whereas one, differ, is stressed on the first syllable, defer is stressed on the second syllable. Now, how do we account for the difference? The difference is not accountable easily in terms of any phonological generalization. We say then that whereas differ is predictable, defer is not predictable. And so we say that the stress in defer is lexicalized. What we mean by stress being lexicalized or idiosyncratic is that a child learns the stress along with the consonants and vowels. In derivational stress, stress is predictable, the child does the generalizations, and in idiosyncratic or lexicalized stress, the child learns the stress along with the vowels and consonants. English has both the types of stress, derivational and lexicalized. We should try and see that there is a distinction kept between these two different types of stress in languages. Another typology of stress systems is fixed stress and free stress. Let's take a look at these examples here. The languages which have fixed stress are those which we have looked at, such as Adi, Spanish, Tamil, in which a certain syllable is chosen for stressing and that is fixed forever. That is, in that word or in that morpheme, it is a certain syllable which will always be stressed. There is another kind of language, free stress language. In a free stress language, there is no fixed syllable which is stressed. For example, in English, we have these words action, apple, in which stress is on the first syllable, behind, contain, the stress is on the final syllable, adjective, apprehend, refugee, we have two stresses, one on the final syllable and another on the first syllable. In adjective, it is the first of the three syllables which is stressed. Thus, we cannot say that there is a certain syllable in English which is stressed. The system is thus called a free stress system. What we mean by free stress is not that you can place a stress on any syllable in a word as you like. What it means is that any of the syllables in the word can be stressed, but once it is stressed, then you cannot change the stress. So free stress system has to be understood in that technical sense. And when we talk about stress in world languages, English comes up again and again for discussion, as a considerable part of its phonology, pronunciations of words, are dependent on stress in words. Now, one of the things that we notice in English is the complexity. There are not many languages in which stress is so complex. Now, the reason for complexity of stress in English is that historically English comes from the Germanic branch of languages which prefers stress in the beginning of words. But English also came to have considerable borrowing from languages such as Latin and French, which are Romance group of languages. In the Romance group of languages, we have stress towards the end of the word. Spanish is one of them. The second syllable from the end is stressed in Spanish. Now, because of the close contact between English and French, the words from French, they were borrowed, came to be pronounced with the same stress patterns as in French. We thus have a mix of both word initial Germanic stress and final Romance stress. The reason for the complexity lies in this historical factor of the language belonging to one group but having a lot of borrowings from the other group, so that there is no single generalization about the stress systems of English possible. Now, what is the consequence of this? And why are we talking about this? We are talking about this because English is now a global language, a world language, but stress in words is one issue, one topic that is a great problem for second language learners of English. It is seldom the case that the second language learners of English find it easy to pronounce the English words with the same stress patterns as the native speakers. One of the directions of acquisition of English by second language learners is towards a closer approximation to the stress patterns of English. So now the summary, we have looked at two major topics among the suprasegmental features discussed in structural phonology. These are juncture and stress. Both have come to occupy considerable importance in phonological theory. But what is interesting is that the original observations were made in the structural phonology, and most of those topics that we discussed today were actually already broached, introduced in structural phonology. Although today we are able to find an explanation for them, but the observations were made by structural phonologists. Thank you.